There's something unsettling about the quiet spaces between houses, the thin walls that separate one life from another, and the flickering lights seen through curtained windows at midnight. The notion of a neighbor, someone so close, yet often so mysterious, has always been fertile ground for the strangest stories. Tonight, under the pale gaze of a crescent moon, let's wander down 3 shadowed streets and peer into the lives of those whose proximity breeds unease, whose very presence chills the blood. These are tales of neighbors you wish you'd never met. The first story unfolds on a tranquil cul-de-sac where the silence is thick, broken only by the occasional barking of a dog or the distant hum of traffic. Here, in a house with paint peeling from the trim, lives Mrs. Wilkins, a woman rumored to be at least 90, with eyes as cloudy as winter skies. Most days, she sits on her porch, rocking gently, her gaze fixed on the house across from her, as if watching, waiting. The neighbors all have their own theories. Some say she's harmless, just lonely. Others whisper that she's cursed, that anyone who gets too close to her is marked. One autumn evening, as the trees shed their leaves in a slow, rattling rain, a new family moved into the house across from Miss Wilkins. The Carsons, 2 parents and a young son, were eager to settle in, unpacking boxes late into the night. The next morning, Mrs. Wilkins appeared at their door, clutching a tin of homemade cookies, her hands trembling. She smiled, but her teeth were yellowed and uneven, and her eyes darted ceaselessly. "Welcome," she rasped, her voice dry as fallen leaves. "You'll fit right in here if you learn the rules." The Carsons thanked her politely and accepted the cookies, though the mother quietly threw them away later, unsettled by the old woman's demeanor. Days passed, and Mrs. Wilkins watched them. Every time they left the house, she was on her porch, rocking, staring. At night, her lights burned until dawn, and sometimes shapes moved behind her curtains, shapes that didn't match her thin frame. One night, as a storm battered the street, the young son woke to a tapping at his window. He peered out and saw Mrs. Wilkins standing in the yard, her nightgown billowing in the wind, her face pale and stretched, her eyes glowing eerily in the lightning's flash. She beckoned to him, her mouth working silently. The boy screamed, and his parents rushed in, but when they looked outside, she was gone. The next morning, the Carsons found muddy footprints leading from their garden up to the window. Small, bare, and unmistakably human, though Mrs. Wilkins insisted she hadn't left her house. Over the following weeks, their son became withdrawn, refusing to sleep, terrified of the shadows that seemed to flicker in his room. The Carsons tried to ignore Mrs. Wilkins, but sometimes, in the dead of night, they would see her silhouette in their yard, standing perfectly still, staring at their windows. Eventually, unable to endure the creeping dread, the Carsons moved away, leaving the house vacant. Mrs. Wilkins resumed her lonely vigil, waiting for new neighbors, her eyes never leaving the empty home. The second tale begins in a cramped apartment building, the kind where every footstep echoes and the walls are too thin for secrets. On the 5th floor, in apartment 5B, lived Mr. Hargrove, an older man of indeterminate age, whose face was rarely seen by anyone. He kept odd hours, his door always locked, and a strange metallic scent often drifted from beneath his threshold. The other residents whispered about him. He was a recluse, perhaps dangerous and certainly odd. One evening, a young woman named Eliza moved into 5C, directly next to Mr. Hargrove. She'd heard the rumors but dismissed them as idle gossip. Her first week was uneventful, but on the 7th night, she was startled awake by a loud thud from the neighboring apartment. Then came a low, guttural moan, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Eliza pressed her ear to the wall, her heart pounding, and heard faint, wet noises, like someone chewing slowly and deliberately. The next day, she confronted Mr. Hargrove in the hallway. His eyes were sunk deep into his skull, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. He smiled, revealing teeth that were chipped and yellow. "Did I disturb you?" he asked, his voice oily with mock concern. "I was cleaning." After that, Eliza tried to avoid him, but the noises persisted, sometimes louder, sometimes softer. Always at odd hours, she began to notice small animals disappearing from the alley behind the building. Stray cats, birds, even a raccoon. One night, overcome by curiosity and fear, she peered through the mail slot in Mr. Hargrove's door. Inside, the apartment was almost bare, save for a single table. On it lay a collection of bones, meticulously cleaned and arranged, gleaming in the moonlight. Mr. Hargrove stood over them, his hands stained dark, his back bent like a crow's wing. Eliza recoiled, her breath frozen in her lungs. The next morning, she reported what she'd seen to the building manager. But when they entered 5B, the apartment was empty. No bones, no blood, no sign of Mr. Hargrove. Only a single scrap of paper, scrawled with strange symbols, and the faint, lingering scent of something metallic. Mr. Hargrove never returned, but sometimes, late at night, Eliza hears scratching behind her walls and the echo of that wet, chewing sound. Our final story winds through the labyrinthine lanes of a small, forgotten town, where the streetlights sputter and the houses seem to lean in, listening. Here, in a narrow, ivy-choked house, lives the Linden family. They are polite, distant, and rarely seen outside. Their neighbors, the Parkers, have always found them odd, never hosting guests, never speaking above a whisper. One bitter winter, the Parker children began to notice strange lights emanating from the Lindens' basement windows. Soft, blue glows that pulsed and flickered. Sometimes they heard chanting, low and rhythmic, barely audible above the wind. The parents dismissed it as imagination, but the children became obsessed, watching the house at all hours, searching for clues. One night, as snow blanketed the world in silence, the eldest Parker boy, Sam, crept across the yard and peered into the Lindens' basement. Through the frosted glass, he saw the family gathered in a circle, their faces twisted in concentration. In the center of the room lay something that writhed and shimmered, not quite human, not quite animal. The chanting grew louder, and the room pulsed with unnatural light. Sam stumbled back, terrified, but as he turned to flee, a cold hand clamped onto his shoulder. Mr. Linden stood behind him, his eyes black as coal, his breath steaming in the cold air. "You shouldn't spy," he whispered, his voice barely more than a hiss. "Some things are not meant to be seen." Shaken, Sam ran home. But after that night, he was never the same. He stopped speaking, his eyes hollow, his sleep plagued by nightmares. The Parker family tried to move, but every attempt was thwarted. Papers lost, deals falling through, and the strange accidents befalling anyone who tried to help. The Lintons remained, their house growing darker and stranger with each passing year. Some nights, the blue lights still flicker, and faint chanting floats on the wind. And sometimes, neighbors find small, odd objects on their doorsteps, twisted bits of bone, scraps of cloth, and once, a single perfectly round eye. In these three tales, the line between neighbor and nightmare blurs, and the safety of home becomes just another illusion. The next time you see a curtain twitch or hear a soft footstep in the hallway, remember, not all who live nearby are friends. Some are watchers, some are hungry, and some are waiting for you to look their way. Sleep well if you can, and don't forget to lock your doors.